Good evening and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're cutting through the propaganda fog surrounding what is now openly being called the US-Israel war on Iran. The mainstream networks are giving you sanitized briefings. We're giving you the receipts. Maya, the dispatches coming out of the region this week paint a picture Washington desperately does not want the American public to see.
That's right, Alex. I'm Maya Clarity, and tonight we have 5 stories that, when stitched together, reveal a coordinated geopolitical realignment happening in real time. We're looking at Iranian diplomacy outmaneuvering Trump's State Department, hospitals reduced to rubble, China quietly rerouting global trade through its rail corridor, fresh Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon, and back-channel negotiations in Oman over the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't 5 stories. This is one story told from 5 angles.
Let's start with the Middle East. I report on Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi returning to Pakistan despite Donald Trump canceling his envoys trip. Think about what that sentence actually means. The President of the United States tried to block diplomatic movement between 2 sovereign nations, and those nations told him no. Pakistan, a country Washington has spent 2 decades treating as a client state, is now openly defying American diktats to host Tehran's top diplomat.
And the framing in Western press is that this is some kind of provocation. It's not. It's the predictable consequence of Trump's policy of maximum coercion. When you cancel envoys' trips, threaten secondary sanctions, and bomb a sovereign nation's nuclear facilities, you don't isolate Iran. You isolate yourself. Islamabad is doing the math. Their economy, their energy security, and their regional standing depend on not being seen as a Trump errand boy. So Araghchi gets the red carpet, and the empire's writ keeps shrinking.
What mainstream coverage refuses to acknowledge is who benefits from this realignment. The military-industrial complex benefits from the war itself, of course. But the diplomatic vacuum Washington is creating? That's being filled by Beijing and Moscow. Every cancelled envoy trip is a gift to the SCO. Every sanction is an accelerant for de-dollarization. The neocons running Trump's foreign policy are functionally working as recruiters for a multipolar world order.
Let's move to the second story, and this one demands moral clarity. Middle East. I published an opinion piece documenting what they call one of the greatest tragedies of this war, the collateral damage inflicted on Iran's medical facilities. Hospitals. Clinics. Pharmaceutical supply chains. These are protected under the 4th Geneva Convention. Striking them is, by definition, a war crime. And it's happening with American bombs, American intelligence, and American political cover.
And where is the outrage from the institutions that exist precisely to prevent this? The WHO has been muted. The ICRC issues carefully worded statements that name no perpetrators. The UN Security Council is paralyzed by an American veto that has been used over 50 times to shield Israeli operations. The infrastructure of international humanitarian law has been systematically gutted, and now we're watching the consequences in real time as Iranian children die from preventable conditions because the dialysis machines are gone.
The cynical brilliance of the Israeli targeting doctrine is that it produces exactly this kind of suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. Every strike on a hospital comes with a press release claiming Hamas, or Hezbollah, or now the Araghchi was using it as a command center. The evidence is rarely produced. The pattern, however, is undeniable. From Gaza's Al-Shifa to southern Lebanon to Tehran's research hospitals, the medical sector is treated as a legitimate target. That isn't war. That's collective punishment.
And let's name who pays for it. The American taxpayer. $3.8 billion a year in unconditional military aid to Israel, plus emergency supplemental packages that now exceed $20 billion since October 2023. While American hospitals close maternity wards because of Medicaid cuts, your tax dollars are funding the destruction of Iranian ones. That's not foreign policy. That's a transfer of wealth from working Americans to weapons contractors, laundered through a foreign government.
Story 3 takes us to a fascinating angle that almost no Western outlet is covering. The South China Morning Post reports that the Middle East shipping crisis is dramatically elevating the profile of the China-Europe railway network. 235 cities across 26 European countries now linked by more than 120 Chinese rail corridors. What started as a Belt and Road experiment is now functioning as a strategic alternative to the Suez Canal and the Strait of Hormuz.
This is the part the war hawks did not wargame. When you destabilize the maritime choke points of global trade, capital does not just sit there bleeding. It reroutes. And the route it's taking runs straight through territory where the United States has no leverage, no bases, and no ability to interdict. Every container that moves from Chongqing to Duisburg by rail instead of by ship through Hormuz is a ton of cargo Washington cannot tax, sanction, or sink.
And note the geopolitical irony. American policy has spent decades trying to contain China's overland reach into Europe. Now, by greenlighting a war that makes maritime shipping insurance unaffordable and Hormuz transit a coin flip, Washington has handed Beijing the marketing campaign of the century. European logistics directors are signing multi-year rail contracts. German automakers are restructuring supply chains. The dollar's grip on global trade settlement weakens with every cancelled tanker route.
Who loses? American port workers. American shipping insurance underwriters. American naval contractors whose entire business model depends on the indispensability of the U.S. Navy as guarantor of sea lanes. If you can move goods Beijing to Berlin without ever touching saltwater, the whole post-1945 American security architecture starts looking like a very expensive subscription nobody needs to renew. That's the conversation happening in European boardrooms right now, and it's nowhere on CNN.
Story 4. Middle East Eye reports that Israeli warplanes have struck southern Lebanon again, according to Lebanese state media. Let's be precise about what this means. There is supposedly a ceasefire in effect between Israel and Hezbollah, brokered last year. Israel has now violated it hundreds of times. Each strike is reported, briefly, then memory hold. The Lebanese state, already collapsing economically, has no recourse. The international community shrugs.
This is what a unipolar enforcement vacuum looks like in practice. Israel strikes whoever it wants, whenever it wants, with whatever munitions it wants, and the only consequence is another State Department spokesperson saying Israel has the right to defend itself. Defend itself from what, exactly? From a country still digging bodies out of the rubble from last year's bombing? The asymmetry is grotesque, and the silence of the Western press is complicity.
And let's connect the dots that the corporate media will not. These southern Lebanon strikes are not isolated. They're part of the same campaign as the Iran strikes, the Yemen strikes, the ongoing Gaza siege. This is a regional war of attrition with one strategic objective: preventing the emergence of any coherent power center in Western Asia that could challenge Israeli regional dominance or American hegemony. The Lebanese civilians killed tonight are casualties of an imperial project, not of any military necessity.
And the financing flowchart hasn't changed. American 2,000-pound bombs, manufactured in Missouri and Arkansas, dropped from American F-35s on villages whose only crime is geography. There is a direct, unbroken supply line from Lockheed Martin's quarterly earnings call to a Lebanese mother's funeral. That supply line is the actual story, and it is the one story you will never see traced on a network owned by a defense contractor's parent company.
Which brings us to Story 5, and this is where the diplomatic chess match gets interesting. Middle East Eye reports Iran's Araghchi is in Oman discussing efforts to end the war and, critically, the security of the Strait of Hormuz. Oman has historically been the backchannel of choice between Tehran and Washington. The fact that these talks are happening publicly, with Oman as the explicit broker, tells you the official US-Iran channels are completely broken.
And the Hormuz piece is the leverage. 20% of the world's oil flows through that strait. If Iran chooses to make passage difficult, global crude prices spike to levels that crash Western economies overnight. Tehran knows this. Muscat knows this. Washington knows this. The reason Araghchi can sit in Oman discussing terms is that Iran holds a card no amount of carrier strike groups can take off the table. That's why Trump is suddenly very interested in finding an exit ramp.
And notice who is not in the room. The United States is not a party to these talks. Israel is not a party. The European Union, having abdicated its independent foreign policy, is not a party. The actual diplomacy that may end this war is being conducted by Iran, Oman, with quiet input from China, Russia, and Pakistan. The architects of the war have been demoted to spectators of the peace. That is a tectonic shift in global diplomatic gravity.
And let's be honest about what a negotiated settlement would actually mean. It would mean an Iran with its sovereignty intact, its nuclear program continuing under modified safeguards, and its regional alliances strengthened. In other words, it would mean the war achieved nothing for its instigators except graveyards full of children and the acceleration of American decline. That is the truth Trump's team is now trying to spin into a victory speech.
Let's pull back and look at the pattern, because this is what mainstream news refuses to do. Story by story, what we see is an empire whose tools no longer work. Sanctions create alternative payment systems. Bombings create resistance coalitions. Cancelled envoy trips create new diplomatic pathways. Maritime blockades create rail alternatives. Every coercive lever the United States pulls produces the opposite of its intended effect. This is what hegemonic decline looks like in real time.
And the domestic implications are staggering. The American war machine costs roughly $900 billion a year. That is more than the next 10 countries combined. It is justified by the claim that this spending buys global stability and American prosperity. But the evidence in front of us shows the opposite. The spending creates the instability degrades the prosperity, and the entire arrangement enriches a small contractor class at the expense of everyone else.
Who benefits? Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing's Defense Division. The 5 companies whose stock prices have set all-time highs since the Iran strikes began. Their lobbyists wrote the policy. Their former executives staff the Pentagon. Their board members sit on the think tanks that produce the op-eds justifying the war. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a documented network, and it is the actual government of the United States foreign policy.
Who loses? Iranian children dying without dialysis. Lebanese villagers buried under American bombs. American workers whose tax dollars fund all of it instead of healthcare or housing. European consumers paying war premium prices on every imported good. Pakistani diplomats forced to choose between sovereignty and sanctions. The losers number in the hundreds of millions. The winners number perhaps in the thousands. And the losers are not allowed to vote on it.
The role of the press in all of this deserves its own indictment. The New York Times, The Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they have functioned as stenographers for the war machine. Anonymous officials make claims. Those claims become headlines. Those headlines become public consensus. By the time the claims are debunked, 3 more cycles have moved on. This is not journalism. This is manufacturing consent in the textbook Chomsky-Herman sense, and it is more refined than ever.
We do this show because there has to be a place where the documentary record is taken seriously. Where Middle East Eyes reporting on hospital strikes is treated as the war crime evidence it is, not as an opinion piece to be balanced against Pentagon talking points. Where the South China Morning Post's analysis of trade flows is engaged with on the merits, not dismissed because of its country of origin. Truth has no passport, and neither should journalism.
And we want to be clear about the moral stakes. When a hospital is bombed, someone made that targeting decision. When a child dies of preventable causes because sanctions blocked a medication, someone signed the order. These are not natural disasters. They are policy choices made by named human beings sitting in named buildings drawing named salaries. The first step toward accountability is refusing the language of passive voice. Hospitals do not get destroyed. Pilots destroy them on orders.
And accountability has to extend to the enablers. The senators who voted for the supplemental funding. The cabinet officials who briefed the strikes. The pundits who manufactured the casus belli. The defense executives who profited. The journalists who laundered the propaganda. There is a paper trail on every one of these decisions, and history is going to be considerably less kind to these people than the cable news circuit is being right now.
So what do you do with all of this? Because outrage without action is just consumption. First, learn the names. Find out which of your elected representatives voted for the latest weapons package and tell them, on the record, that you know. Second, redirect your attention and your dollars. Independent journalism, including outlets like Middle East Eye, runs on subscriptions. Starve the propaganda machine. Feed the people doing the actual reporting.
Third, talk about it. The single greatest weapon of the manufactured consensus is the social cost of breaking it. If everyone around you treats hospital bombings as normal, it takes courage to name them as crimes. Be that voice in your circle. At the dinner table. At the workplace. In the comments section of every sanitized article. Refuse the silence. Silence is not neutrality. Silence is the operating fuel of every empire that ever ground human beings into profit.
Fourth, organize locally. The federal government is captured. The state legislatures are captured. But city councils, school boards, university trustees, pension funds, these are venues where divestment campaigns and accountability resolutions can actually win. The BDS movement has shown the playbook. Apply it to every contractor, every endowment, every public dollar that touches this war. Make the cost of complicity visible and material.
And fifth, take care of yourself and the people around you. Empire wants you exhausted, atomized, and despairing because exhausted, atomized, despairing people do not organize. Sleep. Cook for someone you love. Build a community that can outlast a news cycle. The long arc bends toward justice only because real human beings keep bending it, and you cannot bend anything when you are too burnt out to stand. Resistance is a marathon, not a doom scroll.
That's our show tonight. The stories we covered are not isolated incidents. They are chapters of a single unfolding history, and we are all characters in it whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is not whether you are political. The question is whether you are awake. We will be back tomorrow with more of what the corporate press refuses to tell you. Until then, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and stay loud.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Good night, and remember, the truth is not partisan. It is just inconvenient to power. Tell it anyway.